Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, Bachelor in Social Work, BSW. Elective Courses BSW E002 VOLUME 1 Social Work Intervention with Individual and Groups. Unit 14 Contemporary Social Problems -2. Introduction. Social problem is any undesirable condition or situation that is judged by a majority of the people within a community to be intolerable and to require group action towards constructive reform. Examples are juvenile delinquency, drug addiction, crime, prostitution, divorce, chronic unemployment, poverty, and mental illness. These social problems vary with social class. A social class is a large category of people within a system of social stratification who have a similar socioeconomic status in relation to other segments of their community or society. A social class is not organized, but the individuals and families who compose it are relatively similar in educational, economic, and social status. Those who are classified as part of the same social class have similar life chances. Some sociologists regard social classes as being primarily economic in nature, whereas others tend to stress factors such as prestige, style of life, attitudes, identification, etc. To refer to any condition in the society such as crime or alcoholism, the term used was social pathology. However, it has become obsolete today. Pathology implies a biological analogy in which society is conceived as an organism that can become either sick or healthy. It has been largely replaced by such terms as social disorganization and social problems, which are not associated with the organic model of society. When the social control in society weakens, the social class faces the social problems. Social control is any social or cultural means by which systematic and relatively consistent restraints are imposed upon individual behavior, to which people are motivated to adhere. This is a direct fallout of failure of conformistic behavior in a society. Conformity is behavior that is in accord with the expectations of a social group. It reflects acquiescence to the roles or social norms and is expressed in responses that are either similar to those of others or prescribed by group customs or norms. Conformity may be defined as the endeavor to conform to a standard set by a group. It is a voluntary imitation of the prevalent modes of actions, distinguished from rivalry and other aggressive phases of emulation by being comparatively passive, aiming to keep up rather than to excel, and concerning itself for the most part with what is outward and formal. Cooley, 1904. The term usually denotes conformity to the norms and expectations current in the individual's own membership group. Conformity to norms of an outgroup is thus equivalent to what is ordinarily called non-conformity, that is, non-conformity to the norms of the in-group. Merton, 1957. Suicide. One of the major social problems is suicide. The long hot summer of the millennium year 2000 saw an unusual spurt in suicides in different parts of India. It was scarcely even noticed that, since the near mass suicide of farmers in 1997-98, there has been a marked increase in suicides and suicide attempts. National Crime Records Bureau data, despite the underreporting of numbers and causes, shows nearly 1 lakh suicides a year. Besides the overall number of victims, their geographical spread, class background, income group, economic status, occupational antecedents, age group, family situation, etc., all indicate that suicides are no longer mere episodic occurrences, but have assumed a near systemic character. The near exclusive concentration of suicides amongst the poorest strata of society underlines the deep socioeconomic roots of suicide. Meanwhile, the judiciary is slowly shifting its stand on treating suicide as an offense. Ever since the famous study on suicides by the renowned sociologist E. Durkheim, social science has evolved ways of understanding and tackling the set of circumstances, processes, and structures which lead people to take their own lives. However, what is sadly lacking is a comparable response in the form of social policy by the state and social action by civil society. Suicide is death resulting either from a deliberate act of self-destruction or from inaction when it is known that inaction will have fatal consequences. There are many types of suicides. Even without a comprehensive profile on suicides, both at the micro and macro levels, the known facts about the last few years appear to be significant pointers to a heightened multidimensional social crisis in India. Most of the causes listed in the official statistics, poverty, unemployment, a sudden and unacceptable downturn in economic fortune, an unbearable debt burden and the consequent socio-economic and psychological pressures, dowry disputes, illness and failure in examinations, etc., relate to social conditions. At least, some of these maladies rarely afflict the well-to-do. In this sense of the various categories of suicide identified by Durkheim, the most relevant for present-day India is anomic suicide, as against egotistic and altruistic suicide. Altruistic suicide is one of the three types of suicide described by Emil Durkheim. Altruistic suicide is a type of suicide in which an individual who is very closely integrated into a group or society kills himself for the welfare of the group. Altruistic suicide is motivated by a desire to serve the needs of the group. It is suicide based on self-sacrifice and tends to occur in social systems that emphasize the importance of the individual. The Japanese harakiri is a way to destroy oneself rather than disgrace one's family or group. Anomic suicide, this type of suicide results from normlessness or social and personal disorganization. The value system of the group no longer has meaning for the individual, and she feels isolated, lonely, and confused. Any disruption of a way of life may lead to this type of suicide. For a rich person suddenly to become poor, or a poor person suddenly to become rich, might lead to a catastrophic breakdown in the established normative integration of the individual's personality. Anomic suicide, then, is a result of not being properly integrated into a system of cultural values, and thus feeling isolated and regarding the social norms as meaningless. The incidence of anomic suicide would presumably be greater in societies that experience a high rate of social change, with a rapid disintegration of traditional social expectations. It would also tend to be higher among certain categories of individuals, such as the divorced or unmarried. Egoistic suicide, suicide that is due to the existence of strong social norms for which the individual is made to feel personally responsible, thus resulting in an overwhelming burden on the individual. The group itself is not strong enough to provide the individual with a sufficient source of support and strength outside himself. Neither is he sufficiently integrated to be able to mitigate his individual feeling of responsibility and guilt for moral weaknesses and failure. Egoistic suicide is due to a strong value system, weak group integration, and an overpowering sense of personal responsibility. Substance abuse drug addiction can be defined as a state of periodic or chronic intoxication, detrimental to the individual and the society, produced by repeated consumption of drugs, natural or synthetic. Its characteristics include 1. An overpowering desire or need, compulsion, to continue taking the drug and to obtain it by any means. 2. A tendency to increase the dose. 3. A psychic, psychological, and sometimes, a physical dependence on the effects of the drug. United Nations Expert Committee on Drugs Liable to Produce Addiction, World Health Organization Report 21. Geneva, 1950. India has about 3 million, about 0.3% of total population, estimated victims of different kinds of drug usage, excluding alcohol dependence. Such population comes from diverse socio-economic, cultural, religious and linguistic backgrounds. India is the biggest supplier of illicit demand for opium required primarily for medicinal purposes. Besides this, India is located close to the major poppy growing areas of the world, with Golden Crescent on the northwest and Golden Triangle on the northeast. These two regions make India vulnerable to drug abuse, particularly in poppy growing areas and along the transit routes. Over the years, drug addiction is becoming an area of concern as traditional moorings, social taboos, emphasis on self-restraint and control of the joint family and community are eroding. The processes of industrialization and urbanization have led to the loosening of the traditional modes of social control, thus rendering an individual vulnerable to the stresses and strains of modern life. The fast-changing social milieu, among other factors, is mainly contributing to the spread of drug abuse, both of traditional and of new psychoactive substances. The introduction of synthetic drugs and intravenous drug use leading to HIV, AIDS has added a new dimension to the problem, especially in the northeast states of the country. Various surveys indicate a high concentration of drug addiction in certain social strata and high-risk groups, such as commercial sex workers, transport workers, and street children, and in the northeastern states, border areas and opium-growing regions of the country. The situation in northeast states has been a matter of concern due to high incidence of intravenous drug use, IDU, especially in the state of Manipur, leading to HIV, AIDS. The seropositivity amongst them is about 70%. Constitutional and Legal Framework Article 47 of the Constitution of India directs the state to regard the raising of the level of nutrition and the standard of living of its people and the improvement of public health as among its primary duties. And, in particular, to endeavor to bring about prohibition of consumption, except for medicinal purposes, of intoxicating drinks and drugs which are injurious to health. Section 71 of the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act, 1985, as amended, provides as under, the government to establish centers for identification, treatment, etc., of addicts and for supply of narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances. 1. The government may, in its discretion, establish as many centers as it thinks fit for identification, treatment, education, aftercare, rehabilitation, social reintegration of addicts. 2. The government may make rules consistent with this act providing for the establishment, appointment, maintenance, management and superintendence of the centers referred to in subsection 1, and for the appointment, training, powers, duties and persons employed in such centers. The issues relating to drugs are tackled by the Government of India through its two-pronged strategy, viz. Supply reduction and demand reduction. Whereas the supply reduction is under the purview of the enforcement agencies with the Department of Revenue as the nodal agency, the demand reduction strategy comes under the domain of social sector and the Ministry of Social Justice. The findings of studies also indicate to the relationship between drug abuse and the socio-economic conditions or the social dynamics of the population. Therefore, there is a need to recognize drug abuse as a psychosocial-medical problem, which can be best addressed through community-based interventions. Keeping this in view, the Government of India has a three-pronged strategy for demand reduction consisting of I. Building awareness and educating people about the ill effects of drug abuse. E. Dealing with the addicts through program of motivational counseling, treatment, follow-up and social reintegration. E. To impart drug abuse prevention, rehabilitation training to volunteers with a view to develop an educated cadre of service providers. Thus, the overall objective of the strategy is to empower the society and the community to deal with the problem of drug abuse. The government has established a National Center for Drug Abuse Prevention, NCDAP, under the aegis of the National Institute of Social Defense, New Delhi, to serve as the apex body in the country in the field of training, research and documentation relating to drug abuse prevention. While all-round efforts are being made for prevention and containment of drug abuse in our society, much needs to be done to achieve a satisfactory impact. The causes of problem are transnational and drug abuse prevention shall require Herculean efforts on the part of all the institutions. The empowerment of society through sensitization and awareness appears to be the only solution to strengthen the efforts of enforcement agencies in containing the proliferation of drug trafficking and drug abuse. Adult crime. Crime is 1. Any behavior that violates the criminal law. 2. Any behavior that violate legal sections, criminal, civil, military, which prescribe punitive action against offenders. 3. Any behavior contrary to the group's moral codes for which there are formalized group sanctions whether or not there are laws. 4. Any antisocial behavior that is harmful to individuals or groups. Organized crime. Crime committed by members of an organization devoted to activities that are in violation of the law. Criminal organizations such as mafia, criminal syndicates, have a division of labor with certain roles filled by skilled specialists, hierarchy of status and authority, their own system of norms, and strict organizational loyalty and discipline. These organizations also often develop informal arrangements with members of the local police and sometimes with certain influential community leaders. White-collar crime. Edwin M. Sutherland first introduced the term white-collar crime, which is defined as a crime committed by a person of respectability and high social status in the course of the discharge of his/her official responsibilities. Consequently, it excludes many crimes of the upper class, such as cases of murder, adultery, and intoxication, since these are not customarily a part of their occupational responsibilities. Also, it excludes the confidence games of the wealthy and the members of the underworld, since they are not persons of respectability and high social status. Examples of white-collar crime include embezzlement, fraud, graft, legal combination in restraint of trade, misrepresentation in advertising, infringement of patents, adulteration of food and drugs, fee splitting by doctors, and bribery. Though the social and economical damage of the white-collar crime is greater, these crimes usually are less severely punished than the more conventional crimes, which are more likely to be committed by members of the lower classes. There is less public resentment against white-collar crime as compared to other types of crime. A criminal is 1. A person who is convicted of violating a criminal law. 1 who is convicted of a felony. 2. A person who commits an antisocial act whether or not he/she is convicted of committing a crime. This definition would include any person who violates the laws or behaves in any way that is injurious to the society or to other individuals. It would include persons whose violations of the law are not discovered, as well as those whose antisocial acts are not illegal. 3. Because of the varied meanings associated with the term criminal, instead of attempting at a general definition, scholars focused on types of criminals, such as professional criminals, white-collar criminals, those in organized crime, and so forth. It was felt that by emphasizing on the study of careers would give types of criminal more sociological and less legal orientation to the study of crime. Legalistic criminal, an individual who violates the law unintentionally either because of ignorance, as in the case of a feeble-minded person, or because the law is so confusing that it is virtually impossible to obey. Professional criminal, a career criminal who is highly trained for work. He/she often has a philosophy of crime and takes pride in his/her work. Forgery, burglary, counterfeiting, and confidence games are some of the careers pursued by professional criminals. For example, professional thief. Psychopathic criminal, a person who commits a crime because he/she is psychologically unable to control his/her behavior. Psychopathic criminals are psychotics whose psychoses result in illegal acts. They include the kleptomaniacs, pyromaniacs, and sexual psychopaths. Situational criminal, the person who commits a crime because of the overwhelming pressures of an unusual situation in which he finds himself. Criminal behavior is contrary to his normal life pattern, and it is unlikely that he would commit a crime again. Juvenile delinquency, a violation of law or ordinance by individual below the legal age of the community, is termed juvenile delinquency. It is essentially a legal concept. It does not include all acts of misbehavior or even serious misbehavior by children or youth, but only those acts that violate the law. Adults are considered more responsible for their actions than are children or adolescents, and such juvenile delinquent behavior when performed by an adult is considered a criminal behavior. However, there are situations in which juveniles are legally restricted whereas adults are free, for example, buying liquor. The legal age dividing juvenile delinquency from adult crime is 18 years. Generally, the punishment for delinquent behavior is influenced by the attitudes of the local community and the degree of general tolerance for adolescent misbehavior. Juvenile justice. The Juvenile Justice Act 2000, JJA, is the primary law for children in need of care and protection. The JJA is designed for the care, protection, development, and rehabilitation of neglected and delinquent juveniles, as well as for the adjudication of and disposition of certain matters related to them. The program for juvenile justice include to provide for full coverage of services envisaged under the Juvenile Justice Act, 1986 so as to ensure that no child under any circumstances is lodged in prison, to bring about qualitative improvement in the juvenile justice services, to promote voluntary action for the prevention of juvenile social maladjustment and rehabilitation of socially maladjusted juveniles. To develop infrastructure for an optimum use of community-based welfare agencies. Amendment of Juvenile Justice Act JJ Act 1986 as amended for bringing the same in conformity with UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, and other international conventions, agreements. An attempt is made to clearly define the differential approach provided to children in conflict with law and to those in need of care and protection under the existing Act. It is proposed to provide for effective provisions for various alternatives for rehabilitation and social reintegration such as adoption, foster care, sponsorship and aftercare of abandoned, destitute, neglected and delinquent juveniles, children. The new legislation integrating these provisions was adopted recently as the Juvenile Justice, Care and Protection of Children, Act 2000. Minorities are any recognizable racial, religious, or ethnic group in a community that suffers some disadvantage due to prejudice or discrimination. This term, as commonly used, is not a technical term, and indeed it is often used to refer to categories of people rather than groups, and sometimes to majorities rather than minorities. For example, though women are neither a group nor a minority, some writers call them a minority group, because in a male-oriented society women are discriminated against, which in many ways bears similarity to the discrimination suffered by minorities. On the other hand, a group that is in a privileged status or is not discriminated against, even if it is a numerical minority, would rarely be called a minority group. Thus, as the term is often used, so long as it refers to a category of people who can be identified by a sizable segment of the population as objects for prejudice or discrimination. 5 religious minorities, namely Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists and Zoroastrians, Parsis, have been notified as minorities as per the provisions of the National Commission of Minorities Act of 1992. These 6 communities constitute about 18% of the country's population. Constitutional safeguards for minorities under the Constitution of India. Certain safeguards have been provided to the religious and linguistic minorities. Some of the important provisions are: 1. The right to conserve language, script and culture under Article 29(2), the right to establish and administer educational institutions under Article 30. 3. Article 347 provides for presidential direction for recognition of language. 4. The right to submit representations for redressal of grievances to any authority in the government in any of the languages used in the states, union territories under Article 350. 5. Article 350A provides for facilities for instruction through the mother tongue at the primary education level. And 6. Article 350B provides for a special officer to investigate all matters relating to the safeguards provided for linguistic minorities under the Constitution. Welfare of minorities. The 15-point program for welfare of minorities was launched in May 1983. The program is in the nature of guidelines to the states, UTs and aims at giving a sense of security and for ensuring rapid socio-economic development of minority communities. The 15-point program is based on a 3-pronged approach, namely, I. To tackle the situation arising out of communal riots, E. Ensuring adequate representation of the minority communities in employment under the central and state governments as well as public sector undertakings, and E. Other measures, such as ensuring flow of benefits to the minority communities under various development programs, maintenance and development of religious places, Waqf properties and redressal of grievances of the minorities. The state governments, UTs and the concerned ministries, departments of Government of India implement the program and send half-yearly reports to the Ministry of Social Justice. Analyzed, reviewed and the deficiencies noticed in the implementation of the program are brought to the notice of the authorities concerned for remedial action. At the state level, the progress under the program is monitored at the level of Chief Minister, Chief Secretary. At the district level, Deputy Commissioner, District Magistrate monitors the program. National Commission for Minorities. The National Commission for Minorities has been reconstituted in February 2003 for a period of 3 years. The Commission has been set up to perform a number of functions for the effective implementation of safeguards provided under the Constitution for the protection of the interests of the minorities and to make recommendations in this regard to the central government or state government, as the case may be. The Commission receives approximately 3,000 complaints, representations a year. The police, service matters, disputes relating to religious places and complaints relating to minority educational institutions broadly come under the complaints received. After taking cognizance of the complaints, reports are called for from the concerned authorities. On receipt of the reports, the Commission makes appropriate recommendations to the concerned authorities. The Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members of the Commission undertake visits to states, UTs during the period to review the problems relating to minorities. The Commission has also constituted a minority education cell to exclusively look after the problems faced by the minority educational institutions concerning recognition, affiliation, grant in aid, etc. Commissioner for Linguistic Minorities. The Office of the Special Officer for Linguistic Minorities, commonly known as the Commissioner for Linguistic Minorities, was created in July 1957, in pursuance of the provision of Article 350B of the Constitution. The Commissioner for Linguistic Minorities, CLM, in India has her headquarters at Allahabad with 3 regional offices at Kolkata, Belgaum, and Chennai. The CLM takes up all the matters pertaining to the grievances arising out of the non-implementation of the constitutional and nationally agreed scheme of safeguards provided to linguistic minorities. These grievances may be brought to its notice by the linguistic minority individuals, groups, association or organizations, at the highest political and administrative levels of the state governments and UT administrations. On receipt of the reports, the CLM recommends remedial actions to be taken. The Commissioner for Linguistic Minorities in India submits annual reports, which are sent to the concerned ministries, departments of the central government and the governments of various states, UTs for follow-up action after placing them in Parliament. The CLM has so far submitted 38 annual reports. Backward classes. The Constitution of India prescribes protection and safeguards for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes and other backward classes with the object of removing their social disabilities and promoting their varied interests. The main safeguards are abolition of untouchability, protection from social injustice and various other forms of exploitation, throwing open religious institutions of public character to all sections of the population. Removal of restrictions on access to shops, restaurants, wells, tanks, and roads, giving them the right to move freely and acquire property, giving them the right of admission to educational institutions and receiving grants out of state funds, permitting the state to make reservations for them in services, giving them special representation in the Lok Sabha and the state Vidhan Sabhas, setting up separate departments and advisory councils to promote their welfare and safeguard their interests. Prohibition of forced labor, and making special provision for the administration and control of the scheduled areas. The machinery for safeguarding the interests of OBCs, SCs and STs was created in the form of setting up separate commissions for them. Other backward classes. The backward classes are those castes, communities that are notified as socially and educationally backward classes by the state governments or those that may be notified as such by the central government from time to time. Till 1985, the Backward Classes Cell, BCC, in the Ministry of Home Affairs used to look after the affairs of backward classes. With the creation of a separate Ministry of Welfare in 1985, later renamed as Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment W.A.F. 25.5.1998, the matters relating to scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, other backward classes, OBCs, and minorities were transferred to the new ministry. The Backward Classes Division in the ministry looks after the policy, planning, and implementation of programs relating to social and economic empowerment of OBCs. It also looks after matters relating to two institutions set up for the welfare of OBCs, National Backward Classes Finance and Development Corporation, NBCFDC, and the National Commission for Backward Classes, NCBC. National Commission for Backward Classes, NCBC, the National Commission for Backward Classes, NCBC, Act, 1993 was enacted on the direction of the Supreme Court to set up a permanent body for entertaining, examining and recommending requests for inclusion and complaints of over-inclusion and under-inclusion in the central lists of other backward classes, OBCs, of citizens for the purpose of making reservation in civil posts and services under Government of India. Composition of the Commission. The Commission consists of a chairperson who is or has been a judge of the Supreme Court or of a High Court, a social scientist, two persons who have special knowledge in matters relating to backward classes, and a member secretary who is or has been an officer of the central government in the rank of a secretary to the Government of India. Every member holds office for a term of 3 years from the date he assumes office. Advices of the Commission. The Commission is mandated to examine requests for inclusion of any class of citizens as a backward class in the list and hear complaints of over-inclusion and under-inclusion of any backward class in such lists and to tender such advice to the central government as deemed appropriate, under Section 9(1) of the NCBC Act, 1993. The advice of the Commission is ordinarily binding upon the central government under Section 9(2) of the Act. Since the inception of the Commission, the central government has received 811 advices from the Commission for inclusion or amendment of castes, communities in the central lists of OBCs as well as for rejection of claims of certain castes, communities for inclusion in these lists. The government has accepted 338 advices for inclusion of castes, communities in the central lists and notified them. 51 advices for inclusion have recently been approved by the Cabinet and were notified on the 21st of September 2000. The government has also agreed to 415 advices pertaining to rejection of claims for inclusion in the lists. 7 advices are under process. Scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. The SCs comprised 16.3% of the country's total population. The highest numbers of SCs are found in Uttar Pradesh. About 84% of the SCs live in rural areas and are working as agricultural laborers, sharecroppers, tenants and marginal farmers. Most of them are engaged in jobs like sweeping, scavenging and tanning. About 2/3 of the bonded laborers are scheduled castes. Literacy among scheduled caste people is extremely low. Most of them live below the poverty line and are the victims of social and economic exploitation. In practice, scheduled caste people continue to be subjected to discrimination, harassment, and humiliation. Various reports every year reflect an increase in the number of crimes committed against the scheduled castes. Many SC women are the victims of rape by the upper caste men. The SC men, on the other hand, are exploited by upper caste by usurping their lands, giving them low wages, using them as bonded laborers, and so on. The STs comprised 8.08% of the country's total population. At present, India has the second largest tribal population in the world, next only to Africa. The tribes in India are spread over the length and breadth of the country. They vary in strength from a few hundreds to several lakhs. The highest number of tribal population is found in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. Some of the main problems of the tribals are poverty, indebtedness, illiteracy, bondage, exploitation, malnutrition, and unemployment. National Commission for Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes. The need for providing adequate safeguards for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes was recognized by the framers of the Indian Constitution. For this purpose, special provisions were made in the Constitution of India to promote social, educational, economic, and service interests of these two weaker sections of the society. The Constitution of India also provided for appointment of a special officer under Article 338 for investigation of all matters relating to the safeguards provided for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes and to submit reports to the President, annually and at such other times, as the Commission may deem fit, about working of these safeguards. In order to oversee the implementation of various safeguards provided for SCs. A multi-member commission, known as the Commission for SCs. 3.92. The National Commission for Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes is, thus, a statutory body having its headquarters at New Delhi and with 18 state offices located at Agartala, Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Bhubaneswar, Bhopal, Calcutta, Chennai, Chandigarh, Guwahati, Hyderabad, Jaipur, Lucknow, Patna, Pune, Ranchi, Raipur, Shillong and Thiruvananthapuram. A chairman who is assisted by a vice chairman and 5 other members heads it. The present commission, fourth in the series, was constituted in March 2002. Function and duties of the commission. The functions, duties and powers of the commission have been laid down in clauses 5, 8, and 9 of the amended Article 338 of the Constitution. The following are the clauses. Clause 5. It shall be the duty of the Commission, a. to investigate and monitor all matters relating to the safeguards provided for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes under this Constitution or under any other law for the time being in force or under any order of the government and to evaluate the working of such safeguards. b. To inquire into specific complaints with respect to the deprivation of rights and safeguards of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. c. To participate and advise on the planning process of socio-economic development of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes and to evaluate the progress of their development under the Union and any state. d. To present to the President, annually and at such other times as the Commission may deem fit, reports upon the working of those safeguards. a. To make in such reports, recommendations as to the measures that should be taken by the Union or any state for the effective implementation of those safeguards and other measures for the protection, welfare and socio-economic development of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and f. To discharge such other functions in relation to the protection, welfare and development and advancement of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes as the President may, subject to the provisions of any law made by Parliament. By rules specify. Clause 8. The Commission shall, while investigating any matter referred to in subclause a, or inquiring into any complaint referred to in subclause b, of clause 5, have all the powers of a civil court trying a suit and in particular in respect of the following matters, namely, a. Summoning and enforcing the attendance of any person from any part of India and examining him on oath, b. Requiring the discovery and production of any documents, c. Receiving evidence on affidavits, d. Requisitioning any public record or copy thereof from any court or office, a. Issuing commissions for the examination of witnesses and documents, f. Any other matter, which the President may by rule, determines. Clause 9. The Union and every state government shall consult the Commission on all major policy matters affecting scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Women in the Indian society have been victims of humiliation, torture, and exploitation in both social and family spheres. Today, women are being recognized as important, powerful, and meaningful contributors to the society. Ideologies, institutional practices, and the existing norms in the society have discriminated against women. Some of these discriminating practices thrive even today. In spite of the legislative measures adopted in favor of women in our society after independence, the spread of education and women's gradual economic independence, countless women still continue to be the victims of violence. They are beaten, kidnapped, raped, burnt, and murdered. The Constitution of Independent India provided for equality of status and opportunity for women. The Constitution enunciated positive discrimination policies in their favor to enable them to overcome their handicaps arising out of centuries of oppression and unequal treatment. While the formal picture in respect of women's status thus appears quite bright, the reality of women's everyday life is found to be very different. Women continue to be the victims of violence, e.g., rape. Traditional social evils continue to flourish, e.g., dowry. Discrimination in the economic sphere is rampant, e.g., unequal wages, and newer challenges in the context of technological changes and global forces emerge to violate their rights and dignity, like female feticide and immoral traffic. National Commission for Women. The National Commission for Women, NCW, which was set up in 1992, pursuant to an Act of Parliament, was itself a recognition of this reality. It was established to monitor the legal, social and economic situation of women. The National Commission for Women was set up as statutory body in January 1992 under the National Commission for Women Act, 1992, review the constitutional and legal safeguards for women, recommend remedial legislative measures, facilitate redressal of grievances, and advise the government on all policy matters affecting women. Important developments pertaining to NCW. The Committee on the Status of Women in India, CSWI, recommended, nearly 2 decades ago, the setting up of a National Commission for Women to fulfill the surveillance functions, to facilitate redressal of grievances, and to accelerate the socio-economic development of women. Successive committees, commissions, plans including the National Perspective Plan for Women, 1988 to 2000, recommended the constitution of an apex body for women. During 1990, the central government held consultations with NGOs, social workers and experts regarding the structure, functions, powers etc. of the commission proposed to be set up. In May 1990, the bill was introduced in the Lok Sabha. In July 1990, the HRD Ministry organized a national-level conference to elicit suggestions regarding the bill. In August 1990, the government moved several amendments and introduced new provisions to vest the Commission with the power of a civil court. The bill was passed and received assent of the President on the 30th of August 1990. The first commission was constituted on the 31st of January 1992. The second commission was constituted on July 1995. The third commission was constituted on January 1999. The fourth commission has been constituted on January 2002. The composition of the commission is as follows: A chairperson, committed to the cause of women, to be nominated by the central government. B. 5 members to be nominated by the central government from amongst persons of ability, integrity and standing who have had experience in law, trade unionism, M.